For the uninitiated, economics is about money. As you should know by now, that's really not true at all. Economics is about making rational choices with limited resources. Money, though, plays a very important part in macroeconomics. And when economists talk about money, we mean a very specific thing. Like many other aspects of the discipline, there are specific definitions for specific concepts, and it's important that you use those concepts correctly. So a generally accepted definition of money for economists is assets that are regularly used to buy goods and services. Now, when we say assets, that is something like dollar bills or a checking account, gold perhaps, something that is accepted in a transaction in an economy. So one of the things that should be clear from this is that money, from an economist standpoint, is not the same thing as wealth and is not the same thing as income. When we talk about wealth, that's the accumulated value of all of the assets that someone has at their disposal. So it's not the thing that someone uses to buy stuff, it's the value of all of their accumulated assets. Money is not the same thing as income. Now, I know that people will say, well, I'm earning more money now than I used to because I've got a new job. That's fine for everyday conversations, but that's not what economists mean. The income is what is the salary that you get. It is the extra purchasing power that you get by working or investing. Money is the thing that you use to take your income and buy goods and services. Now that may seem like a semantic difference and one that's not very important, and it may not be in your day-to-day life, but it is in an economics course, because when we talk about money, we mean a very specific thing. That means when you talk about money, you should also think about that very specific thing. All right, so if it's this asset that is used, well, what are the purposes? We'll talk about some examples of what is money in just a moment, but economists basically talk about three important roles for money. Again, money defined in the way that we discussed. One is sort of implicit in what we just talked about, is money's role as a medium of exchange. Now, as usual, there are pretty easier ways to say this, but it's basically the thing that you use to buy those goods and services. If someone accept a dollar bill to buy a cup of coffee, accept $50 to go out to a nice restaurant, that's a medium of exchange. It's the thing that you use to get the thing that you want to buy, and that a firm will accept for payment. And this is also sometimes called the use of money to conduct transactions. It's the way it's the medium, it's the thing that you use to conduct this exchange or transaction. Money is also a unit of account. It's a way to add up the value of your assets, the revenue as a firm, as your income as a worker. And so we use dollars in the United States to evaluate the value of a house, or how much I had to pay for a dinner last week, or how much I had to pay for a movie. It's what a firm would use to look at whether or not they're making profits or not. Okay? So it's this accounting unit. Also important, and it also can be thought of as a store of value. Because money is accepted in transactions today, one normally thinks that you can use that money tomorrow to also buy goods and services. So if you hold cash, if you hold currency, if you hold money, you will have value in the future. So this store of value highlights the multi-period aspect of money, that you can hold it and spend it later. Okay, so all of these are very important for various aspects of an economics class, and we'll refer to these in different contexts. Now, in the United States, there is, among economists, there's a before I get there, I should maybe talk about what's not money in terms of what we've just addressed. Credit cards are not money. Now you say, well, I can use a credit card and I can go buy goods and services. True. But the credit card is it's essentially a kind of borrowing. When you put money or put a transaction on a credit card, that means that you are obligated to pay for that in the future. The credit card itself is not the medium of exchange. It's the promise to pay money in the future. ATM cards, debit cards, much closer, because those are, if you use a debit card, that immediately comes out of a checking account. So that's much closer to the idea of money. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of definitions. This is an economics terminology that is used in the United States. M1, so the first definition of money. That includes the value of all checking accounts, sometimes called demand deposits instead. Again, that's sort of odd terminology, but the demand deposits means that if you have funds in a checking account in your bank, you can draw on them. You can demand the funds simply by writing a check. So you have access to this purchasing power by simply signing a piece of paper. So that's something very easily used for transactions, part of the money supply. Okay. Also, currency plus, so that is bills, like pieces of paper, plus coins. Now, in ancient times, coins was really the source of money. People carried around small pieces of gold or silver or other precious metals. That was money in the old days. We now have a modern banking system. We have access to checking accounts, demand deposits. Also, the government can print pieces of paper that are accepted as for transactions, so that has greatly expanded the kind of money that is available in a modern economy. But traditionally, it would have been, physical pieces of metal. Okay. The final one, which, boy, this one is not used anymore. Traveler's checks. Okay, some of you may not even know what this is, but used to, back in the old days, you go overseas and you wanted to buy something, you wanted to exchange your money, your dollars into, say, Deutschmarks in Europe way back when. You'd bring a traveler's check, and a foreign bank would accept that as payment in order to give you the local currency. Now, essentially, traveler's checks have been replaced by debit cards. Okay, so this is really a relatively minor part of certainly the money supply in the United States. Now, in 2013, what was M1 in the United States? About 2.5 trillion dollars. If you added up all of these sources and a few other ones, which I'm not going to go into, you would have about $2.5 trillion that was in circulation. Now, in comparison, in 2013, U.S. GDP was about 16 trillion. So a couple of things to note about this. One, in a sort of obvious way, the money supply is not equal to national income, because 2.5 is nowhere near 16 trillion. But it also reflects that these two things are measuring completely different things. GDP, value of goods and services produced inside the physical borders of the United States. 2.5 trillion was part of the payments that were taking place. So, for example, you may have certain transactions, certain types of goods and services that produced that are not directly involved with transactions in physical money. So there's no necessary correlation between those two things. Money supply is also a stock. We talked about stocks versus flows in another video. Stock is the amount of stuff physically available in at one particular time. So there's $2.5 trillion stock of money in the economy. GDP is a flow. It's being generated every year. So I don't know what the number for M1 is in 2014, but it's probably not that far, even though another $16 trillion worth of goods and services are produced. So the amount of transactions that take place every year far exceeds the amount of physical money in circulation. Now, there is a broader definition that is called M2, which is everything that you have here plus some other components. For example, savings accounts and what are called money markets. Now, I'm not going to talk about money markets right now. It's not the market for this kind of money. Instead, it's kind of a short-term. It's a checking account, essentially, for all practical purposes, held in a mutual fund for investments. Okay, so set that aside for now. But this is, if you add these two, plus a few others that I don't want to address, into in 2013 about 10.5 trillion. So much larger. So one of the things that you'll notice here that's not included in a definition of the domestic money supply. So the domestic money supply does not include foreign currency. Now, I don't want to go into this in a lot of detail right now because it's really the subject of a major part of an international economics course. But foreign currency typically is not included in the money supply. Now, I'll say just as a digression that there are some countries that have determined not to use a domestically created money, but instead will use dollars to circulate. Panama uses dollars, US dollars. So this is not always the case. For the United States purposes, we do not include foreign currency in our definition of the money supply. Now finally, with this set of relationships in mind, when we talk about monetary policy, that is going to be actions by a central bank to alter some of this. If you look at the video on monetary policy, you'll see that we'll talk about printing money as a way to increase the money supply, increasing the currency in circulation, or an open market purchase of bonds. That will change the checking account. So I don't want to go into that right now, but I want you to keep in mind that these definitions are used explicitly when talking about the impact of monetary policy by a central bank.